Darryn Peterson's the most talented draft pick in franchise history, bar none. So it's A-OK to be excited, for crying out loud.
You are Locked On Jazz, your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Jazz Nation? Leif Thulin with you here on Locked On Jazz. Today, we discuss the fascinating history of the second overall pick and why I think it's a bunch of nonsense to dwell on the history of it and who could step up for the Jazz this year. But let's start with the bunch of nonsense I believe the curse of the number 2 pick is. This is something that fans talk about a lot, and I think it's to talk and build the narrative of, oh, the number 2 pick doesn't pan out. Yes, I'm well aware that there are fewer all-stars that come from the 2 pick than the 3 pick. But I'm always excited to do Locked On Jazz. Today in particular, I could not wait. Went live show because I asked for ideas for what to talk about. And one was like, oh, I think you're building up too much hype about Darryn Peterson. Too much hype. Why shouldn't I? Why shouldn't I be excited that my favorite team, your favorite team, has their most talented player they've ever drafted? And yes, I know that Karl Malone was drafted by the Jazz. I know that John Stockton was drafted by the Jazz. But those guys didn't go number 2 for a reason. They were wrong, but they weren't number 2. Donovan Mitchell was 13. Deron Williams, my favorite player ever growing up, not as talented as Darryn Peterson. So, of course, I'm excited. Of course, I'm putting out expectations. Did I say he would become Kobe Bryant? No. I said his game can look like Kobe Bryant. I said it could look like Devin Booker. It could look like all these guys. So that's one point. But everyone should be excited and have expectation for the guy that is the most talented player to ever be drafted by the Utah Jazz. And the highest pick we've had should be good. Like that's natural. We should believe that. So I will dispel the myth of the number 2 pick and talk about why I think it's a little bit of a misnomer at this point, and it's something that fans say that are paranoid as opposed to something people should believe. Also, the new Everyday program for Locked On Jazz is out, so check it out. There's 2 different price tiers with different amounts of stuff, but of course, you got the ad-free, the newsletter, the Discord, and then, of course, there's Emptying the Noggin post-game letter with David Locke for the season. That's a must-have. So, like I'm saying right here, the number 2 pick, of course, has less success than the number 1. And sometimes it's because the number 1 is just a generational can't miss, and that the team who gets that is unbelievably lucky. So an example of that would be Victor Wembanyama. Victor Wembanyama went number 1, and Brandon Miller went number 2. Brandon Miller's not bad. Is he Victor Wembanyama? No. So, yes, it's different. But I want to go through this myth of, like, number 2 picks are terrible, therefore Darryn Peterson's going to struggle. Like, that's just not true. And the history tells you that it's getting better and better. So I'm going to give some thoughts, and then I'll go through the list. So first thought, right now, the last couple picks have been very good. So I'm going to say Darryn Peterson falls into the good, but we'll see, obviously. But Dylan Harper, many people are like, oh, yeah, he's better than, there's a world he's better than Cooper Flagg. There's a world he's the best prospect in the NBA that's under a certain age after watching him play in the playoffs. He was great. Alex Sarr, the book's not out yet, but he's solid. Brandon Miller, he's probably going to be an all-star a couple times. Chet Holmgren's been all-NBA. Jalen Green, not a fan of him, but he scored 20 a game multiple times. James Wiseman's the only bust in the last 7 years. Ja Morant, he's been all-NBA. Marvin Bagley, a bust, and Lonzo Ball, injury. So that's the last 10. So you're 7.5 out of 10. 7.5 out of 10. That's 75%, and a lot of those guys have been really good. So a lot of the history where people go like, oh, what about Hasheem Thabeet? What about Evan Turner? Like, that stuff is different now. Like, those guys were in college for longer. Evan Turner had some injury issues. Hasheem Thabeet was just a silly pick, to be honest, and I think many believed that at the time. But the point I'm trying to make is the narrative you're trying to build about this paranoia is silly to not be excited about the Utah Jazz getting Darryn Peterson. Darryn Peterson, many believed was a better prospect at the same time as when Cooper Flagg was getting all the hype at Duke. They're like, oh, Darryn Peterson, AJ DeBonce, the next class are better. So why shouldn't we be excited for a guy who scored 20 points per game with a hamstring injury? And, he comes in and has his first game in the preseason and scores 28 points. And the next one, he gives you 25 and 12. And the question was, the next one was like, oh, he had turnover issues, and can he pass? And he goes, 12 assists, 2 turnovers. The guy's an unbelievable shooter, 95th percentile in all metrics shooting the basketball, on the catch, when guarded, all that stuff. He's great at all that stuff. So I think it's ridiculous to not be excited about Darryn Peterson. Now, I think it is not fair to say he has to have the career of Kobe Bryant, but I didn't say that. I said his game resembles that of Kobe Bryant, which is why we should absolutely be over the moon about drafting Darryn Peterson. So the quote that I was given was, I'm afraid you've done a disservice to Darryn by creating impossible expectations. I've never been around a Utah player as overhyped as he has been. And then, of course, this is our first number 2 pick. And I'd love a program about number 2s and how they've fared. So here you go, sir. Yes, there hasn't been someone as hyped as this. The only player I can remember getting similar amount of hype was Donovan Mitchell after his summer league. And look how that turned out. Amazingly. Yes, we ended up not having Donovan for the long haul, but he gave us great years. He was an all-star, led us to the number 1 seed. We had a chance to win a championship, honestly. I know people are going to be like, wait, come on, we didn't make it out of the second round. That was a good chance to win a championship. That year was more open than most. So Donovan Mitchell is great. And here's a comparison. It says, how about Dwayne Wade with a 3-ball? I don't see that. Dwayne Wade was an otherworldly slasher, and Darryn Peterson is less of a slasher and more of a shooter. So I gave the 3 tiers a comparison of who he resembles in my mind. I think Bradley Beal's the floor in terms of he scores, he shoots the ball. Bradley Beal scored 30 points. And I think Darryn Peterson will be around there at some point in his career. I've said that. I've maintained that since November of last year. And then I think Devin Booker is kind of the level you're like, okay, I think that's likely. I like the idea of Ray Allen too. I didn't say this one, but Ray Allen with the Supersonics and the Bucks was a very good athlete along with being a fantastic shooter. And I think Darryn Peterson is that. He's a very good athlete and a very good functional athlete, along with being a fantastic shooter who can play on the ball. And he's got more on the ball game than the Ray Allen that I saw with the Celtics. The Ray Allen that I watched on the Sonics, I still think Darryn Peterson's got more game. And Ray only eclipsed like 23 points a couple times. And I think Darryn Peterson's got more on the ball ability, more passing ability. And that's a Hall of Famer, obviously. I think you're looking at some Devin Booker, Ray Allen as what we're expecting. And if he can get to the Kobe, you're obviously beyond elated. And I didn't compare him to Kobe, but there's something to be said for the way that he scores is not blow by. It's shoot the ball over the top, and I'm going to get to my spot, and there's nothing you can do about it. So I think it's absolutely absurd to not be excited about the best prospect the Jazz have ever had. That's the end of the rant. Now let's talk the good of number 2. Number 2 is not number 1, and it won't ever have the same success because sometimes there's clearly a better player. But I think it's an absolute disservice to talk about number 2s overall when only referencing the bad, only referencing the Michael Kidd-Gilchrist, the Evan Turner, the Hasheem Thabits. Like, you got to reference the Kevin Durant, LaMarcus Aldridge, Ja Morant, Chet Holmgren, Dylan Harpers too. Because there's probably greater successes than there are busts. And there are a lot of really good NBA players, and I think people are getting better at evaluation. We'll talk about the number 2 pick and just how bad the 2 pick is according to the history of basketball next on Locked On Jazz. Support for today's episode comes from Indeed Sponsored Jobs. When the workplace chaos hits and you need the right hire, Indeed Sponsored Jobs helps connect employers with candidates who match specific needs like skills, certifications, and location. So less time gets spent searching and more time gets spent finding the right fit. People are finding quality hires on Indeed right now. In the minute I've been talking to you, just the minute I've been talking to you, companies like yours have made 27 hires on Indeed, according to Indeed data worldwide. Usually the biggest difference isn't someone doing more work. It's having someone who knows exactly what needs to happen. And that has to help everyone else run everything smoother. So it's not a selfish, I did everything. It's making everyone understand their role and thrive in it. Spend less time searching and more time actually interviewing candidates who check all your boxes. Less stress, less time, more results. When you need the right person to cut through the chaos, this is a job for Indeed Sponsored Jobs. And listeners to this show will get a 75% or $75 sponsored job credit to get your job the premium status it deserves at Indeed.com/podcast. Just go to Indeed.com/podcast right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? This job for Indeed sponsored jobs. Welcome back to Locked On Jazz. Leif Thulin with you here, dispelling a myth that I think is one that is outdated and also overspoken. So is it true that the second pick has had some bad picks? Yes. But we can't say the first is, perfect. It's not a clean slate of, every first pick's been great. What about Michael Olowokandi? What about Anthony Bennett? What about, Joe Smith was fine, but that's not a number one pick. Those are just random names off the top of my head. Greg Oden. Okay, so there's plenty. So I just named 5 in a 25, 30-year span. And then you look at the number 2 pick, and of course you're going to look at let's just take the last 25 years. There's Jay Williams, who motorcycle accident. I'm not going to count that one. Darko Milicic, bad pick. Then the next 3, Emeka Okafor was good, not great. Marvin was fine. LaMarcus Aldridge, a big-time success. Kevin Durant, Hall of Famer, in my opinion, top 12 player ever. Michael Beasley, extenuating circumstances. I mean, obviously it's a bust in the sense that he didn't get to play out his career, but that was more off the court, preventing him from playing on the court. Okay, so, there's a couple misses right there, no doubt about it. Hasheem Thabit, bad pick. Evan Turner, injury, bad pick. Derek Williams, Michael Kidd-Gilchrist. That's a horrible stretch. But the point I want to make is after that, the stretch becomes pretty good. Darryn Peterson, hopefully Hall of Famer. Dylan Harper, I think, is going to be an all-pro guy for the next decade. Alex Sarr, I think, will be probably an all-star at some point. Brandon Miller, an all-star at some point. Chet's already been an all-NBA guy. Jalen Green probably will be an all-star at some point, but I will fully admit I'm not a Jalen Green guy. James Wiseman, a bust. John Morant, all-NBA. Marvin Bagley, a bust. Lonzo Ball, prior to injury, was a good pick. So as history is considered, you've got to understand the context of at that time, the picks were bad. And as it's become the last 10 years, the batting average has gone up for picks. I think scouting's gotten better. So I think when you reference all these bad picks, yes, some of them are awful, but I think the context is different. And also you're seeing a different era of picks because there are fewer one and dones in that time. And so you're drafting, and there was more of a precedent of needing bigs and stuff like that. So I am a believer that the number 2 pick yields fine results. I think it's an oddity, an abnormality that number 3 has more all-stars yielded than number 2. I don't think it means anything. I think it is something people say to stir up content, stir up drama going into the draft. Now, I do absolutely believe what David Locke talked about in terms of if you take 4 draft picks, top 4, that one can be an MVP, one can be an all-star, one can be top 50, and one's not great. And there's only been a couple ever that have yielded 4 players that are like MVP, all-NBA, all-star, top 50. I think this year could do that, and he made a good point. And there's only been 2 where there's been MVPs, and it was Russ and Derrick Rose the same year, were drafted in the same year. And actually, neither of them won. That doesn't add up, but you get my point. It's like there's just not many years in which MVP happens at the same time. It must have been Russ and Derrick Rose, but Tyreek Evans won the Rookie of the Year. Was my final point. Is that there's not an indicative situation where you're like, oh, this guy's amazing, this guy's unbelievable, and then the rest of the guys are bad because these rules. No, I think it's going to be more and more common. Like this past year, I think Dylan Harper has a case over Cooper Flagg, but I would take Cooper Flagg. Cooper Flagg won Rookie of the Year. I think Dylan Harper was the second best all year. I did rookie rankings on the Everydayer Club. By the way, new prices as well as new content on the Everydayer Club. But I talked about it. I was like, I think Ace can be top 5 in this, but I would go Dylan Harper. And a lot of people are like, how are you taking Dylan Harper over Con? Well, I think that one's clear now that Dylan Harper's number 2. Con was 3, VJ Edgecombe 4, and Ace 5. Like that's kind of the ranking, right? I think those top 5 can all be all-stars. That's exceedingly rare, but it's going to become more common in my opinion, because I think drafting is going to get better, but you may not just have enough talent in any given draft class to get there. Last year's class was sensational. This year's class is sensational. So I think Darryn Peterson going 2 is less about Darryn Peterson going 2 and more about how much people think of AJ DeBonsa. Because if Darryn Peterson was 1, I don't think anyone would have this conversation of like, oh, Leif, are we drafting a bust because of the history of the draft? No. You'd be over the moon about drafting a number 1 pick. And that's how I feel. I think the Jazz got the best player in the draft. I think Darryn Peterson's better than AJ. I've said this for 2 years. And I'll stay with it. I'm going to stay with it. I think Darryn Peterson is the most talented player in this draft class, whether he was drafted at 1, 2, 3, or 4. So that's my assessment. But I think the narrative about the numbers of all-stars and the number of all-NBA players coming from different draft spots is overblown. The amount of good players from a class and the amount of like qualification of like, okay, are you an MVP candidate? Are you an all-NBA? Are you an all-star? That's real every year. But that's not the question that's asked. It's if he's number 2, are we destined for failure? And should we not hype up the best prospect the Jazz have ever had? To me, that's an absolute miss. Like, why would we not be excited to get a guy that can take the Jazz after years of being bad, intentionally being bad, and then still not getting those guys with misfortune in the draft? And Ace Bailey's good, but he wasn't Cooper Flagg or Dylan Harper if you were to 1 and 2. And the years prior, you get Cody Williams and Taylor Hendricks. Years of being really bad. And then you have a guy that can change the trajectory of your franchise, take you to the mountaintop. Of course, I'm excited. And I'm going to not be not going to be apologetic whatsoever about being excited for Darryn Peterson, who I think has a capacity to be an all-NBA guy, just like Tim McMahon reported by year 2. I think it's likely that the Jazz are contenders in the Western Conference Finals within year 3 of Darryn Peterson, and we win 55 games within that time frame because we already have 2 all-star caliber players on the team. But the key is not Lowry or Jaren, though they're very good. The key is Darryn Peterson. So, yes, I'm going to continue to hype him up unapologetically. So, let me know what you guys think. How good can Darryn be? What's a fair expectation for him? But I think it's normal to be excited that the Jazz have a chance to really contend again for the first time in years. And honestly, I think they have a better time frame to contend than they even did with Donovan Rudy. I think they have a time frame that's set similarly to that of when they had Darryn, except hopefully this Darryn stays longer. And it's less tumultuous than the finish of Darren Williams' tenure. That's looking too far in the future, but I think the time frame is set more favorably for the Utah Jazz in this time, especially with how the other teams in the NBA that are great probably can't stay together due to the way that CBA is structured. I'm looking way ahead, but that's what you got to do when you draft someone at number 2, because you got to see, it's unlikely we're going to win in year 1 or 2, but 3 through 7, his prime, when he's an all-NBA guy perennially, that's when the Jazz can win a title. So I'm over the moon, and I'm not going to apologize for that. Let me know your expectations for Darryn Peterson. Am I being too grandiose? Am I being too harsh and putting too much pressure on DP? Guys like that are used to the pressure, and I think DP will deliver. Now, who can help the Jazz immediately that I haven't talked about was one of the questions I was asked. And I've got a couple answers. It was prefaced with, Keontae took a huge year 3 leap. Who can take a leap this year that will help the Jazz and those aforementioned guys? I've got 2 answers that I think are dying to have great seasons. And if they do, can change the trajectory of the Jazz this season. All ahead on Locked On Jazz. Welcome back to Locked On Jazz. Leif Thulin with you here. And to me, the answer is very clear. That the Jazz need defense, and they need an ability to have someone score without the basketball. So I think Josh Okogie is one player that I think should have a good year for the Jazz. And if the Jazz play to the playoff level that I think they can, I think it will be a good season from Josh Okogie, and he will become someone we are appreciative of, as opposed to being like, oh, we'll see what he gets. Like, I don't know. And so in that same vein, the 2 players I've been very consistent about are having make and break years. Are Cody Williams and Brice Sensabaugh. I said this, that Cody seems like the player that the Jazz would rather have a good year than Brice, in the sense that they need someone to score without the basketball. Like the superpower of Brice Sensabaugh is his shooting. Now, the Jazz have a lot of players who shoot the ball. They have a lot of players that offensively are very good, and defensively they're not particularly inclined. And the Jazz have 3 players that I think that don't include Darryn Peterson could score over 20 points. And I did a research on it, and it was like there's 15 teams that have probably had 3 players ever, 15 teams ever that have had 3 players score north of 20 in the same season, and actually only like 2 or 3 of them were any good. One of them was all-time great, and it was the Warriors with KD, Clay, and Steph. But, I mean, realistically, a lot of those teams weren't particularly great. And it does scare me that the Jazz have a lot of really good scorers and only one basketball on the floor. And therefore, someone like Cody Williams, who can impact the game by being unselfish, by playing defense, by not shooting the basketball, should have an avenue to play. But at the same time, I was disappointed in his summer league performances. I don't know if he's actually a good NBA defender. I think it's all it's all hype as opposed to substance at this point. He has the attributes, but I haven't seen it yet. Brice Sensabaugh is actually my answer here. Who can help the Jazz? Because what you need in the NBA is to be, if you're a role player, is to be great at a specific thing and focus on that specific thing at a high level. And if you can add something else to make yourself more valuable, then you are invaluable. So an example I would give is George Niang for the Utah Jazz was often maligned for being a poor defender. And honestly, I think it was an unfair narrative that I think he was picked as a poor defender compared to others. But what he did that made him so valuable for the Utah Jazz, and you can argue it's so valuable, but like he made himself valuable and is still in the NBA and just signed with the Warriors the other day, is that he shot the ball very, very well, and he knew where to be. And when he got the ball, he hit shots. There are many players in the NBA that fit this ilk. What about Sam Hauser? There are a lot of guys that understand that their role is absolutely dependent on their shooting capacity. And shooting is even more paramount than ever right now because a lot of teams are shooting a ton of them. So you need to shoot it well. And if you're a bench player who isn't going to have a high usage rate on the ball, you better fill it up from the perimeter and earn your spot on the court. Sensabaugh, in my opinion, is one of the better shooters in the NBA. Like NBA, not just the Jazz, but in the NBA. I think he shoots the best ball on the Utah Jazz, and that includes Lauri Markkanen, and honestly, it includes, at this point, Darryn Peterson. He's a great shooter. And I think what's going to happen is his shooting is going to be undeniable, and you're going to have to play him. Now, I don't think Brice can guard, but Brice is a good rebounder. He is a good rebounder. And so I think you could put Brice Sensabaugh on the floor with a team that plays with energy and plays with pace, and he can fill it up off the bench. And he's the guy who breaks out. And his breakout is that he gets the shots that previously were split between himself, Svi Mikhailuk, and you can name any given role player the Jazz have had in years past. Like if you want to go years beyond that, you remember when Simone Fontecchio had a really good start to a season? I think Brice Sensabaugh can do that because Will Hardy plays offense in a way that is conducive to success for shooters. I think Brice Sensabaugh is the best shooter the Jazz have had in this stretch. And I think he could have a good breakout season. And I've been critical of Brice Sensabaugh for a while. But I really do think the way that the Jazz are forming their team, I think defense is going to be something they strive to try to get into like the 22nd on defense range. And they just want to be great on offense. And someone who can help that ethos is Brice Sensabaugh because he can really shoot the basketball. I think Cody, the Jazz would rather have be better. But what I think happens in terms of answering the question of who can break out to help the Utah Jazz that I've spoken very little about would be Brice Sensabaugh. And then the foil to him is Josh Okogie. I think Josh Okogie plays in that lineup and plays fast and pushes tempo and defends. And I think Josh Okogie plays alongside many of the starters and says, you know what, I'm going to make your job easier, Lauri. I'm going to make things a lot easier for you, Darryn Peterson. I'm going to guard the other team's best player, and I'm going to shoot only open threes. I'm going to hopefully get some steals, get us out in transition. I'm going to work my butt off in making their best player miserable. And so his role is that of sacrifice to make the others better. And Brice Sensabaugh is in a role of opportunity to see if he can make the Jazz more potent offensively. So let me know what you guys think. Ideally, Cody Williams develops, and I would love that. I think he's a hard worker. I think he has gotten better, but the Jazz don't have the time to wait now and wait and see. I think they need substance defensively, and that is what Josh Okogie forms. And then substance offensively is not like, hey, let's see if he can hit open threes when the ball comes to him, because people dare shoot. Like Taylor Hendricks had a great March and April. I've referenced this numerous times. Shot terribly throughout the season in his rookie year. Had a great March and April. And everyone's like, oh, Taylor Hendricks is untouchable. He's going to be awesome. And unfortunately for him, he got injured at the beginning of his second year. But the point is, like, shooting is something that you really have or you don't. and it's not something you can gimmick. If you're left open and you shoot the ball well, and then you're not left open, all of a sudden your shooting goes out the window. Brice Sensabaugh is a guy you got to run off the line, and that's just a known commodity. He can shoot the basketball. And I think the Jazz will run with that. Be like, we're going to play to a given strength, and he'll shoot 40% from three and help our offense, and we'll be a top 10 offense. More so than be like, you know what, we can improve our defense marginally. So that's my belief. And then one player that I've talked about very little, and I love the way he plays, but I don't think he's necessarily going to move the needle. I think John Conchar finds a way onto this roster just for grit. A lot of teams have a gritty player that elevates them, and they're beloved by their fan base. I could see John Conchar find a way onto the Jazz's rotation, even though none of us really have expected it or forecasted it. But that's one belief I have. So in sum, I think Darryn Peterson is amazing. I think he will be amazing. I think he has a chance to be a franchise icon. I think he has a chance to usurp the career of Devin Booker and become a guy who is perennial in the top 10, not rarely in the top 10. I don't mean that as a slight to Devin Booker. It's just how I feel about Darryn Peterson. I think it's ridiculous to say that because he's the number 2 pick, he's going to be cursed and he only has such a ceiling, which I've heard many Jazz fans say. So I'm not just calling out whoever said that on Twitter. And lastly, I think the Jazz could use good seasons from Josh Okogie and Brice Sensabaugh, and I expect a breakout from Brice Sensabaugh. Thank you guys for tuning in to Locked On Jazz. As always, I'll be back with you tomorrow. I'm going to talk about kind of the idea of how the Utah Jazz can build a team that gets better year in and year out without just saying, oh, they're going to get better at this and that. And also, what am I hearing about the offseason? Got a little bit of knowledge in that regard, who's training with whom, all that stuff. I'll try to answer some more. Send in your questions on Twitter, and I'll try to answer them. Thank you guys, as always, for listening to Locked On Jazz. Your first listen, check out Locked On NBA for your second listen. They've got awesome content, keep you up to date with the latest rumors of the NBA, such as George Niang going to the Golden State Warriors. Thanks for tuning in, and as always, go Jazz.